This is a tutorial for the Estonian inlay technique that's used within the yoke of my Liko sweater. The technique is created up of these right side floats that's made up with these contrast color yarns. They're never making stitches themselves. You have a background yarn, which is knitting the whole way throughout. And then you have these contrast yarns, which are laid to the front of the work and behind the work, creating different floats, which then build up the patterns themselves. For this design in particular, each motif uses a separate piece of yarn. So where you have the first motifs along the beginning of the yoke here, each one uses its own strand of yarn. So it's not stranding from one motif to the next. And that just eliminates any big floats having to go all the way across. So it creates a much kind of cleaner, tidier appearance. Each motif kind of spans that wedge of the yoke. So you're using different lengths of yarn in different colors and just repeating that throughout. So if we look further down, you can see, again, you've not got any floats which are spanning across. They're just working their way down in that wedge. We worked with separate pieces of yarn that are added into the fabric. And then I recommend that after you've completed one set of the motifs, so whether that's the flowers at the beginning or the next set of flowers, as you increase the knitting, then just weave in the ends for those little sections, and it just makes it much quicker so that you're not left with tons and tons and tons the finishing line. So I'll put this to one side for a moment, and then we'll have a look at how the technique is worked. I have a little section of the yoke chart here, and this shows how the patterning is represented in chart format. You can see that you've got these colored in stitches, and they represent the contrast color yarn that is floating on the right side of the fabric. So it's floating across 2 stitches here, and it's repeated for 2 rows as well. I've passed on just with some double pointed needles to show you how the method works. We're always working on the right side here because the design is in the round. And the first step that we need to do is introduce the yarn, the contrast color yarn that will be creating the inlay method into the piece of knitting. So we knit across until we reach that first inlay stitch. So that will be dictated by just your empty stitches on your chart. So for the sake of this, I'm just going to knit a couple of stitches. And then you need to have your inlay yarn ready. So as I mentioned, we're working with separate strands of yarn. The pattern guides you for how long these strands of yarn need to be. And they're also worked as a double length. So that just gives you a little bit more kind of thickness and body to it. I've got a little bit of a tail that I'm going to leave, which I'll be weaving in at the end. And I'm just going to lay that tail at the back of the fabric and have the rest of the yarn guiding towards the front of the fabric. And then I'm going to work the number of stitches as dictated by the chart. So you can see we've got 1, 2 stitches. You want to make sure that the stitches that you're knitting, where you've got that float in place, whether it's floating at the back or at the front, in the same with other color work methods, you want to make sure that it's not bunched up so that your float doesn't then become bunched up as well. So just make sure it's kind of nice and even. And then we'll take that inlay yarn, we'll lay it across those 2 stitches, and then we'll just move it to the back of the fabric. So that's completed our first round. And now we can knit across until we reach that next section of the inlay yarn. So I'm back now, ready to start the next round of the inlay patterning on the chart. And again, I'm going to just knit to where the inlay stitch is on the chart. And then we can see from the back that the inlay yarn is now coming from the left-hand side of those stitches where we need to be. So instead of coming from the right side and being able to lay the yarn right to left, it's actually coming from the left side. So what we'll do is grab hold of that main end of the inlay yarn with it situated at the left-hand side of those stitches there. And we're going to bring the yarn from the wrong side forward to the right side. I'm then going to kind of leave a nice little slack tail, nice little loop of it on the right-hand side. And then I'm going to bring the yarn back to the wrong side. So we have this nice little loop situated here at the front. And then I'm going to knit those 2 stitches as dictated by the chart, making sure that those stitches are nice and spread again. And now I've got this loop that's just hanging at the front here. So I'm just going to bring that loop in between those needles to the back again. So we've got that loop now hanging at the back. And then you've got the main end of that yarn and just pull gently and you'll see that that float just tightens up. So again, not too tight, but just so it's kind of nice and firm. And then that round completed, or those stitches completed. So you would knit to the next stitches on the chart, and you're going to be doing the exact same thing. Okay, now we're back again to that same motif. So now we can see we're in the next little stage of the pattern where we're creating the right side of this little flower petal. So again, we're just going to knit to that point where those inlay stitches begin. And then we're going to see now where our yarn is situated. So we can see we've got the yarn that is to the right-hand side now of our stitches. And so when it's to the right-hand side, we're just bringing that yarn to the front of the work, knitting the required number of stitches. So we're repeating exactly what we did when we first laid the yarn in to start it. And then once we've knit the required number of stitches, bringing the yarn to the back. And just repeating that the left side of that petal. So bringing the yarn to the front, knitting these stitches, and then bringing that yarn to the back. So you can see that's that next part started, and now we'll knit until we reach the next motif, continue it for the next motif all the way round to the end of that round. So now we're back at the point where we're going to do the second repeat of those little side petals. We can see from the back side that that inlay yarn is coming from the left edge of the motif. And so we're going to do the same little trick where we loop the yarn to the front again. So we'll have a look at that just one more time. We'll knit to the first inlay point. We'll grab the inlay yarn and bring it to the right-hand side, make a loop with it, and then bring the rest of the tail back to the wrong side. So we've got 2 stitches to do there. Once we've done those 2 stitches, we can take that loop and bring the right sort of edge of the loop to the wrong side. So we've still got the rest of the loop laying at the right-hand side. And then we've got 2 stitches here where the float is at the back. And then we're going to bring the rest of that loop back to the front side and do these 2 stitches, which will have our little float in front. So then now we can put the rest of that loop back to the wrong side and then grab onto that main end and just gently give it a tug just to tighten it up. So you'll always be alternating where you've got these isolated motifs where the inlay yarn will be situated to the left of the motif, to the right of the motif, because we're knitting in the round, but the way that the yarn is being laid is kind of going from sort of left to right or right to left. So we're having to just look at where the yarn is situated. If it's to the left, we're bringing it to the front to create that little loop. If it's to the right, then we're just bringing it to the front without the little loop. And you just repeat that all the way across. Once you reach the end of the motif, then you can just trim the yarn, just leave a nice little tail, and then we'll have a look at finishing off the tails in a moment. Once you've completed a complete motif, so one complete flower, or section of the leaves, basically once you've gone through one of your separate strands, which the pattern explains, then it's easiest if you finish the ends just so that you have less to do at the end. So I've turned this little piece of knitting inside out to the wrong side, and you can just thread the end of that inlay yarn into a tapestry needle. It's good to make just a little fairly loose knot in the yarn so that it keeps it in place and doesn't unravel. And you can find a little adjacent stitch, like a purl bump, just close to where that yarn is coming out, and just bring your tapestry needle through that little purl bump. Start to pull the yarn out, but still leave a little bit of a loop there. And then you can just pull that yarn through. You can leave it on the tapestry needle. Mine's just a little short there. And then just gently kind of tighten it. So you don't want to pull it too tight, otherwise the last float will get too taut, but just kind of enough to secure it. And then with the remainder of your tail, you can just weave it in and out of your same color floats. So I've not got too many here because it was just a little motif, but you can just kind of go in and out with whatever looks neat and tidy and finishes it off nicely. And then once you feel it's nice and secure, you can just trim that end and just repeat that all the way across. I also had a couple of people in the test knit who experimented with needle felting their ends, and that could work really well if you're using a nice kind of sticky yarn like a lamb's wool, and just kind of felting them together so that it doesn't unravel there. So a couple of different options for how you want to secure the ends, but just kind of carefully hiding them in the floats. You can go in and out of some of the main color stitches, just keep looking to the front of the piece and check that none of that yarn is kind of going through, and just repeat it a few times till it's nice and secure, and then just trim any of that excess yarn.